Hey everyone, Karsten, thank you for joining again, all the way over from Germany, where it's evening time for you. I believe we're in the magical space of like 2 week period where the US just had its time change. So we all time traveled over on Sunday. And we're 1 hour closer to you, maybe, I think. Anyway, it's great to see you. Great to see everybody. And thank you for joining us once again. I'm Jonathan Crow, Director of Community here at NinjaOne. And I've got with me the man with the plan and all the information, Jeff Hunter, former sales engineer lead. And now this is your job, Jeff. You're basically doing this. You're hitting the road. You're doing these events virtually, but you're sharing your product knowledge with NinjaOne with everybody here. And we're super happy to have you in that role because you're dang good at it. So thank you, Jeff, for taking time once again to do this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, happy to be here. We're talking about a very important topic today, policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're polling everybody and always keeping an eye out for the questions that folks have, right? What are good topics for us to do more in-depth walkthroughs with? And policies is one that's come up a bunch. Obviously, we have some good resources around this already. There was a webinar that I believe you and Pete did back, gosh, maybe last summer, sometime last year. And that is linked to in the helpful resources section in the Discord. It gets mentioned a lot because this is such a fundamental part of getting Ninja set up and doing so where it's a good example of where you put in some work ahead of time and do this thoughtfully. It can really pay off down the road. So we wanted to cover it again, and it's not going to be the same exact material. There's going to be some changes to it. And if anyone here in our Discord over on YouTube and the call, I may pick on some folks. Don't be shy. I hope this doesn't discourage commenting, but may pick on some folks to come in and comment and share a little bit about your own setups too. But yeah, with that, don't be shy. Comment if you have any questions. If you want Jeff to clarify anything, he will absolutely do so. So please use this time to pick his brain, share with each other too. That's what this community is all about. And we also have our buddy Ian Crago, who I'll bring on in a little bit. Actually, I'll do it right now. Hey, Ian, how's it going?
Hey, good, good. How are you guys?
We're doing well. Thank you for joining us. I was like, Ian, do you want to come on and talk about policy stuff? Because you're a former customer. You've been a ninja for a couple months now. Is it month 2?
This is week 6.
Ah, okay. All right. So yeah, there we go. And you were like, sure, I'm walking the dog, but I'll hustle back. So thank you for doing that. Would love to get your perspective, Jeff. Whenever you feel like it's a good moment to bring Ian in to kind of share. A lot of things you're going to be talking about, building about policies when you have multi-tenants and you're setting up kind of a bigger structure. And Ian's going to bring the perspective of being an internal admin and doing that for a single organization. So that's kind of what we're at. I think I'll quit blabbing around here and hand it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. You may recognize portions of this presentation. I want to clarify, it was actually not me and Pete who did the original one. It was Pete and Ethan Desmond, who is our channel lead on the sales engineering team. But I did help contribute to the creation of it. So I'm not completely unfamiliar with the content. So you'll see maybe some repetition there. But this is going to also incorporate some feedback that we've heard from customers who have viewed the video and said maybe we might want to do 1 or 2 things differently to make things a little bit more easy. And so with that, let's kick things off. We can skip past my picture here for the most part. Just wanted to give a brief introduction about what we'll be talking about. We'll start with the absolute bare bones basics of policies, just in case somebody is not very familiar with that. Perhaps some people who are new to Ninja. We'll then talk about the policy inheritance and how we can use that for top-down management. And then we can talk about how to build these policies. What do we need to take into consideration? What is the best way to approach creating a policy structure that's going to be most beneficial for your organization? And then finally, we'll go ahead and take a dive into the actual Ninja platform to showcase what we have and what we're capable of. And so with that, We'll change slides here to talk about the policy. What is the policy? It is the engine that makes Ninja go. Most of the common day-to-day actions that people care about, in my experience, are controlled by policies. And you can see some of them right here. So what do you want to monitor and alert on, potentially create tickets off of? That would be a combination of either conditions or activities inside of policies. Uh, for patching, for both operating system and third-party applications, what do you want to patch? When do you want to install those patches? And then what gets pre-approved, what gets pre-rejected, and what do you want to have somebody manually review prior to it being installed? If you're using integrated antivirus, that is also going to be a policy setting. And then if you're using NinjaOne Backup, again, also a policy setting. What are you backing up? How frequently are you backing that up? And then how long are you retaining that data for? Now, there is hopefully a conspicuous gap here between the top 4 bullet points and the bottom bullet point, because the top 4 bullet points, it's one-stop shopping. Those settings that I mentioned, you're only ever going to find those options within policies. For scheduled automations, you get a little bit more flexibility with the ability to run scripts detached from the policy hierarchy. For example, we could run as a task, and the benefit of a task is that it is detached from that policy structure, and it's also cross-device type and cross-platform. So technically, you could have one task that runs across every single device in Ninja, whether it is a Windows machine, a Mac machine, or a Linux box, as long as you had the appropriate script and the appropriate language scheduled to run on those devices. So you get a little bit of flexibility there. Just wanted to kind of point out that for the top 4 bullet points, when you are taking into consideration how you want to build your policy, with those top 4, you have no flexibility. Those are going to be policy settings, but with scheduled automations, you get a little bit more of a way to work around the policy structure that we'll be talking about. Now you can see here we have one policy with many devices underneath it. This is a very simple policy structure. Uh, it certainly is not a wrong one. There is nothing wrong with having one policy for your workstations, one policy for your Windows servers, and you can manage as long as all of your settings are consistent. That's totally fine. I have seen people operate like that, and the question would be, why would they change to a different policy structure? And it would be because they had to modify what they're monitoring and alerting on, or when they're patching, based off different groups of devices. Sometimes, if you're an MSP, that can break down on a per client basis. But even if you are sort of running the IT department for your own organization, there might be a situation where you want to have different policies for different physical locations so that you don't have them all patching at the same time. That sometimes you want to break it out so that you don't have patching all occurring at one time, and creating perhaps an overload whenever there is an issue, and overloading the help desk. So some key points to keep in mind about policies in NinjaOne. In Ninja, devices only ever adhere to a single policy. I know that there are other tools that use policies to where you kind of stack them. So a device might have half a dozen or 20 different policies all assigned to it, all controlling various settings. And Ninja works differently. All the settings are inside the policy object, and that single policy object then gets assigned to devices. Now, how are those policies assigned? They are assigned based off of device type within an organization or within a location. And so that means that whenever you install the Ninja agent, the agent is going to recognize one of 3 default device types. It's either going to be a desktop, a laptop, or a server. And so, depending on which of those 3 default device types it is identified as, we can go ahead and automatically assign a policy based off the organization it's inside of. So, ABC Digital, we install a workstation for that organization, and then we recognize that as a Windows desktop. And then within Ninja, a workstation policy automatically gets assigned to that device, so it knows when it's patching, its backups, its integrated AV, etc. Now, you can manually assign policies outside of the policy mapping that I just mentioned. So if you wanted to, say, pick one particular device or several devices and say, hey, I know you're a desktop and you were assigned a policy out of the box, but we want to go ahead and change it. And I want to manually assign a policy to you. You can do that at either the individual device level, or you can do it from the devices menu if you want to do multiple devices at the same time. As a note, that is a button press to manually reassign a device to the proper policy. If you would like to do this programmatically, you can do it through the API. So you have the ability to either modify the device role of a machine through the API, which could have a corresponding change on the policy that's assigned based off the organization mappings we just discussed, or you could directly assign a policy to a device using the API. I've seen people do that to perhaps accommodate specific device types. They want to go ahead and make sure a device gets identified as a proper custom device type within Ninja, for example, a point of sale device potentially, or identifying perhaps a domain controller automatically using Ninja's groups and then programmatically assigning that either an AD domain controller role or a separate policy intended to be just for domain controllers. And one final important key point here is policies are siloed by operating system in addition to servers versus workstations. So out of the box in a completely blank Ninja environment, you actually get 6 policies. You get 2 for Windows, one's a workstation, and one is a server policy. And then you get the exact same for Mac OS, one server, one workstation for Mac OS for Mac OS devices, and then the same for Linux. So you get a total of 6, and they are going to be segmented like that. It's a pretty deep fissure that runs across the platform of workstations versus servers. Some of you may have seen this on the devices menu as well. If you wanted to run a manual policy scan, or sorry, patching scan to either identify patches or install patches across all Windows devices, you actually have to do workstations and servers separately. So one first and then the other in order to take that kind of bulk action. And that starts at the policy level by having that silo where servers and workstations, they're never going to cross pollinate policies. So let's talk about the additional complexity that policies can sometimes allow us to create depending on the different types of devices that we are managing. So obviously having one policy for workstations, one policy for servers, you might not always be able to do that. If you can, great. There is no need to introduce complexity where you don't have a need for it. I think if you are able to standardize your operations so that all workstations use the same settings and all servers use the same settings, you should absolutely do it. However, particularly for our MSP partners who have multiple clients, settings are usually going to vary. You might need to deploy different integrated antivirus to different customers. You might need to then monitor a different subset of conditions and create different tickets for those machines. They might have different line of business applications. And of course, patching cycles. People generally sometimes want to patch on separate days and different times of day. And so, to accommodate that, you might have to create an individual policy for a particular client. Now, this can quickly start to spiral out of control a little bit. Let's talk about how the parent child relationship with policies works. So, we don't want to create a whole bunch of standalone policies and then manually assign them because anytime we need to make a big, wide sweeping change, we have to go to each individual policy to make that change. That's not ideal from a workflow perspective. And so policy inheritance can help ease that burden. You can see here we have one policy at the top. It's our root policy for the operating system and device type. We'll say, for example, this would be the default Windows workstation policy that we have out of the box. I want to go ahead and create some child policies beneath this to accommodate for specific settings. Now, I might create an operational parent policy here. And in this context, I might be putting all of my important settings into the top level root layer here. And then beneath that, I'm actually turning them on or off. So in the top level here, I have everything turned off in terms of conditions and scheduled automations. I essentially just configure everything in my root policy. And then beneath that, I actually turn everything on. And that gives me essentially an interface layer. And we'll talk about the value of that in a little bit. And then below the operational parent policy, I have my child policies that directly manage groups of devices. And so this could be potentially all devices with Sentinel-1, and then this could be devices with Bitdefender Gravity Zone. Alternatively, it could just be different client organizations that patch at different times. This could also be different distinct physical locations for your organization that you want to ensure are patched and have everything occur at the proper times for that location that might not be appropriate for a different physical location. So a child policy, when we create it, if we create the operational parent policy here from the root policy, that is going to have all the exact same settings from the root policy inside the new child policy that we just created. But it's not just a straight copy and paste. It is an active link. And so any new things that get added into the root policy, they will automatically propagate down to the operational parent policy. And you can view this as kind of a waterfall. We're going to start at the top here, we'll cascade down here, and then continue to cascade down to all our device types. Now, what happens when we need to change a setting, when we need to essentially break the flow of the inheritance from the top down to one of these points below? To continue with the water analogy, you can view it as kind of like a valve. So if we create an override on a particular line item in the operational parent policy, that breaks the flow and it starts a new one. And so anything from the root policy will cascade to the operational policy. And if we create an override on a particular line item there, that breaks the flow. And so now only the root policy has that setting, and we're starting a new flow at the operational parent policy that will then continue to cascade it down to our child policies and therefore our devices. Now you can see here that inheritance can stack beyond just one level. So we say parent-child relationship is kind of a shorthand here, but this could be grandparent, parent-child. It could be great-grandparent, grandparent, parent-child. I personally have gone 10 levels of inheritance deep just to kind of see what happens, and it works great. I probably can't foresee that being something that a lot of people are going to need to actually do, but if you did, you can do it.
Hey,
And one
Jeff,
thing to keep in mind here is that the management is top down. You want to try to put as much in your top level policy as you can because you can't go back up. Anything I put in my child policy here that is invisible and not able to be seen by the operational parent policy or the root policy. So just make sure that we want to view policy creation and policy management from a top down structure. And that means that when you start to actually build your policies, you want to deal with uh, your bulk cases first. So up here in the root policy, you want to account for your edge cases, but you don't necessarily want to design for them in the top policy. You want to design for the 80, 90% of what you're dealing with. And then within a child policy further down the chain, we can then go ahead and start to account for our unique edge cases, be they organization specific, location specific, device type specific, whatever happens to be the case.
yeah, Jeff, we're seeing some comments here too from David. Hey, David, thanks for being here. David led an awesome stream a couple weeks ago. And he's saying, along with Breakout Trading, saying they made the same mistake, that had to go back and do a lot of rewriting policies because of exactly what you're talking about in terms of he's saying the top level off is the wrong way to do it. And they did this backwards, meaning they had to go back and do a lot of editing. And Breakout Trading's mentioning that would be nice if we lived in a world where a child policy could be, you could change the parent at some point. But is that something that you've run into these kind of mistakes in terms of like the initial organization? Are there any other things like that you see? These are common gotchas or things you really want to make sure you get right when you first start setting up policies?
Uh, it does tend to be specific on how people are structuring their patching schedules and what they're monitoring and alerting on. I'll say that I have seen people say, well, what really varies for us is patching schedules. And so they'll have their root standalone policy for workstations, and then they'll have their child policies beneath that broken down by patching schedule. And so that might be one day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You have a unique policy for each day of the week with its corresponding patching schedule. And then you assign your various organization policies to that, or you just go ahead and directly map those policies to the organization level. The problem then becomes is that, at least from a managed services perspective, most people who I talk to, more varies than just the patching schedule. You might think that only the patching schedule varies, but there is more that varies according to that. And so I think that building your schedule or your policies based off of patching cycle is an option for sure, but you definitely want to make sure that you're not going to have other things to account for down the line. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that I could recommend to anybody rather than maybe like a simple best practice about policies. It's think about the future. Don't think when you're setting up your policies about just the here and the now. When I started at my previous job, if I had done that, I would not have been able to scale because the company ultimately more than doubled in size over the time that I was there. And so using a simple, one-to-one policy mechanism, it would have been fine for 6 months. But after 6 months, I would have had to go back and basically completely redesign what I was doing. So I think more than anything else, the design and the R&D phase of your policy section is critically important. You have to evaluate not just what you're doing now, you have to evaluate for what you're going to do in the future. What if you acquire additional um, uh, organizations, additional companies, and you then have to fold them in? Does your policy structure allow you to do that? And if it doesn't, you might want to consider something that allows you more flexibility down the line. I'm a big proponent of putting in a little bit more legwork to start with, and then that can make your life a little easier in the future.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Are there any, sorry to keep interrupting you here, but are there any, like with sales engineers or account managers, are there any resources available to help if folks are just getting started with Ninja and they want a little bit of hands-on help, or just kind of other examples? I mean, obviously there's the Discord, they can get peer advice, but anything within Ninja?
Yeah, absolutely. I would certainly recommend checking out the dojo. We have a variety of resources on not just policies themselves and how to structure them, but also the individual components of policies that you're going to want to take into account when you are designing your policy structure. And I would certainly recommend having a conversation with a sales engineer just to confirm that what you're doing is what you would expect. I am certainly a proponent of inheritance in terms of making your life easier, but going ahead and evaluating your individual situation and going over that with another human being is invaluable in my experience.
Awesome. Thanks.
And so now we can kind of see the concept of device overrides. So we can go ahead and override in two different ways. You can override within the context of your parent-child policy relationships. And so in this case right here, we might override one particular line item here for when we are rebooting. And we are doing that at the policy level. And so that means the setting inside our root policy applies to everybody with the exception of this third column from the left right here. We've made a change in the child policy, and therefore that breaks the chain of inheritance and starts a new flow, which this child policy here is then propagating down to all these 4 devices here. So that's one method of overriding policies. That is the preferable one. Keep in mind, anytime that you make an override, you have to account for the fact that your devices are going to that is going to break that chain. And so you want to ensure, or you need to know that as you make more of these overrides over time, that is going to be something you have to account for in what changes you push out. So if you have overrides all over the place, that is going to quickly become something that's difficult to manage because sometimes you want the setting to stay what it's overridden as, and then sometimes you are not going to want that. Now, I certainly recommend doing your overrides within the context of policies where possible. But if you need to, you can also make device level policy overrides. So I could go specifically to one device and I could make a change to the policy settings. And that does not require me to create an additional policy. I'm just making a device level tweak. And that's very beneficial. But again, you only want to use that for changes that are going to be permanent, essentially. Case in point, I have managed servers in the past that recorded security camera footage, and kind of by design, they just filled up the RAID the entire time. And so, being notified about being low on disk space every single day in a situation where that's the design of the server, I don't really care about that. And so I could go to a single device and I could disable or modify the low disk space condition for that device in specific. And so that way I don't have to be bothered by all this additional noise that just isn't relevant to me because it, again, is something that I have designed to happen. Now we are talking in terms, or I've been talking primarily in terms of oh, you enable or you disable as an override, but you can also modify as an override as well. So if you just want to tweak a setting, not just enable or disable it, but actually tweak the threshold that you're triggering a CPU alert off of, for example, or low disk space or any other number of conditions, you can make those modifications too. And that also counts as an override. And then beyond that, you can also add additional conditions, additional scripts that don't exist at further upstream in the parent policies. And so that can be another way that you can actually have something added in a child policy, uh, just to give you that flexibility that you need to manage devices. Again, keep in mind that you, if at all possible, you want to go ahead and put as much as you can in the top level policy. You can then disable it so that it doesn't apply to many organizations and then it only applies to the ones that you care about. Of course, if it is something that is not applicable to anything other than this one subset of devices that we're seeing here, then it might be more beneficial to do it as a child policy and create the condition or scheduled automation within the child policy rather than doing it in the top level. And again, that just comes back to evaluating where, exactly where are your differences? What is varying across the different devices that you manage? Where do you want to have something be very specific? And where do you want to make it as general as you can in order to just make it easier on yourself?
Jeff, David has one question, hoping to get some clarification on.
Hmm.
Regarding overrides, and he's saying, if you make changes to the policy assigned to the device, if you change that, are overrides deleted?
Yes. Yeah, any device level overrides that you make at the individual device overrides, if you change the policy for that device, those overrides are lost. So that is a very good call out there by David. It's definitely something to keep in mind. Any of those device overrides that you put in place, they are permanent on the device unless you change the policy for that machine.
All right, great call out, David.
And keep in mind that overrides take precedence the closer to the device that they are. So if you have one override in the root policy, another override for that same line item in an operational parent policy, and then another one in the child policy, and then finally you make an override at perhaps the device level, like we are right here, whatever is closest to the device is going to take precedence over whatever is upstream from the device. Another possible policy setup here is actually having everything siloed. Now, in this case, you essentially have different device types and they are all unique. So if I want to make a modification to all three policies regarding a particular condition, I have to go into each one to make that modification. So that definitely adds to the amount of work that you have to do within Ninja. However, I don't want to say that this is something you should never do. This may be something that you want to do. We talk about the benefits of policy inheritance being standardization and the ability to do top-down management. I've spoken with some people who are concerned about that. They don't necessarily want certain groups of devices to have that inherited tie back to a parent policy to where it can be easily modified. To them, the siloed policies are a feature, not a bug. They want the ability to kind of keep those, potentially high availability servers separate from regular servers, and so that way a change not meant for those high availability servers does not get inadvertently pushed through something we're doing with an inherited server policy. So certainly an argument to be made for siloed policies within Ninja, but again, think about your devices. Is that something that's actually necessary or required in order for your management? And you can see here, uh, there's no cross pollination, there's no relation between any of these policies. So it is going to mean more work. But again, that may be desirable. You may want to have these siloed and locked off using user permissions so that certain people aren't going to have the ability to make these modifications. So here is yet another potential option here, which is the global parent. We have our Windows workstation policy here, and then beneath that, we have our various device types. And so you can see here, we have shared use devices, laptops and workstations, and then kiosks. And so this is a good example of how you might have different device types that you want to treat differently than just your garden variety workstations and your garden variety servers. Case in point is I used to manage a lot of point of sale devices. And so to me, that occupies a middle ground in between a workstation and a server. Case in point, I probably don't want to know for an extended period of time if a workstation has been offline. Maybe 30 days, I want to get some sort of report that shows me workstations that have been offline for that length of time. Servers, exact opposite. Within 10 minutes, I want to know if I have an offline server that's critical infrastructure. A point of sale is somewhere in the middle. If it goes offline for 12 hours or maybe 15 hours, it's probably not that big a deal. That could just be being turned off overnight. But if a point of sale has been offline for more than a day, I might want to know about it immediately because that's an opportunity to service the machine and get it back up and running, or at least investigate why that machine is offline when it should be online. And so within Ninja, you do get the ability to create those custom device roles, and then that will give you more granular policy mapping capabilities, so that you can have workstations on one policy, servers on a different policy, and then your custom device types on a completely separate policy as well. And so that's another key consideration, I think, to make when you are planning for how you want to build your policies is what are the different device types that I manage? Are they all workstations and are they all servers? Or do I want to treat certain devices differently than others? I mentioned point of sale machines as a possible example. Sometimes, manufacturing devices are sometimes controlled by Ninja. And so that's a perfect example of something that is not a workstation. It's not a server. You probably want to go ahead and have a unique set of conditions and patching schedules for just machines that are going to be doing manufacturing or our kiosks or are public facing in some way to your clients customers. And so this, I think, is a very flexible workflow here. We'll look at another potential option here, which is just sort of the operational interface layer that you may want to add in. And so you might have your Windows Workstation configuration policy at the top, and then below that, you can break it out for your different, broad types of devices. And so this is an example that I used in my previous position. I had sort of different policy concepts that I wanted to push to different sets of devices. And so for technician PCs, they had one set of rules. They had a little bit more flexibility and ability to do stuff on the actual endpoint because this was actually behind a locked door. And so I have one policy for them. And then for my operational policy for managers, I then did a further child inheritance there so that I could treat general managers' PCs differently, regular office PCs differently, and then the chef's PCs differently because there were different software requirements for all three of those. And so you can kind of see here the benefit of creating a more complex inherited structure. But again, I don't want to introduce complexity just for the sake of it. You really want to look at your different groups of devices and see where are the settings inside of policies going to differ. And that would be, again, integrated antivirus conditions, scheduled automations, and of course, your patching cycles. Here we have kind of a variation on the concept here of a multi-layer policy, having both unmanaged and managed policies beneath the global parent here for Windows Server, and then a little bit more granularity beneath that. And this allows you to make your decisions based off of the key factor of are they unmanaged or managed. And so something again to take into consideration here is what is the defining point at which point you would like to intervene for whenever a device happens to have issues. And so here, let's bring it all together. What does maybe a holistic policy structure look like within Ninja? Pretty good example here of having one policy tree or waterfall or pyramid. I'm mixing my metaphors. I apologize for that. For Windows servers right here, we have one for our Windows workstations, and then we have another one over here for our Mac laptops. And so three distinct structures in here. That was about all I could fit on one PowerPoint slide. So this is not to say that you should only have three. You would have as many as you would need to account for your various device types. And so based off our previous conversation, you might have one in here for point of sales. You might have one in here for manufacturing devices. Um, it really is going to depend on what types of devices you are managing. So what goes where? Root policy here. All new traits should go here. This is the point that David brought up. That was, I think, in the previous webinar that Ethan and Pete did about traits being off by default and about how that can cause some problems there. We'll talk about that in just a second. If that's an approach you want to take or do not want to take, the problem with it is that if we do that using this particular structure here with the root policy, when we turn something off and then enable it in the parent policy, it essentially breaks the inheritance because you are then having to, you're creating a device override. And so now anything you do in the root policy isn't propagating down to anything that was disabled because you're having to re-enable it at this level. So not ideal in that case of leaving everything off. So I think we can perhaps excise this portion of the presentation about leaving things off for this particular context. Now, if you did want to potentially do that, you could do something like this where you have a configuration policy layer. And so everything, all new traits would go in here. Everything could be off. And then in here, we could actually go into the operational policy, enable and disable. So you have that interface layer to kind of protect against where you're making the changes and then when they get pushed to production. And then you could actually make your changes or your operational changes in this section here. And then they would propagate down to your parent and then beneath that to your child policies. So kind of to reiterate some of what I've talked about, you want to do a lot of planning. To me, that is the invaluable portion of this. It is looking at your operation, looking at your different groups of devices, looking at what you want to alert on, how you want to maintain compliance for those devices, whatever form compliance happens to take for you. Look at your patching schedules and look at what else you want to do with those specific devices. And then you want to go ahead and build your policy structure around that. We've seen a bunch of examples so far about different potential use cases and how you can use the policy inheritance to design around that. But you really want to go ahead and take your individual devices that you manage into consideration because I've just seen too much variance in my time here at Ninja. I've been here almost 4 years now, and everybody does things a little bit differently. There are certainly some standardization and certainly some core tenets that people are putting in place using Ninja policies. But for the most part, everybody is doing things slightly differently to account for the unique devices that they manage. And so before you put any of this into place, certainly think about it. Think, does your environment require this level of complexity or a level of complexity that you need to put in place? Or do you want to try and keep it as simple as possible? And as an advocate of simplicity, consolidation is key here. Please invest in your top level policies as much as you feasibly can and as much as is appropriate for your environment, given the security environment that we live in. You definitely want to go ahead and invest in the root policies because the more overrides you create, it is going to create more manual work for the administrator of the Ninja account. And of course, you want to standardize as much as you possibly can, given again the feasibility of that. There are some environments where you just can't standardize, and we can account for that through further child inherited policies. But yeah, where you can standardize, you definitely want to take advantage of that. I wanted to go ahead and bring on Ian. Ian has more of a view on the internal IT perspective. So Ian, I just wanted to kind of bring you on and have you share your thoughts about how you, as somebody who's actively used Ninja as a customer, how you were putting into place your particular policy structure.
So, I mean, I had an advantage with a pretty flat organization, um, meaning that I was at a school. We had elementary and high school, and the policies were pretty heavily built around that. So, obviously, we had a servers policy, and pretty much all of our servers more or less fell within the same general rule set. So I had a single, maybe two server policies, but for the most part, it was just a server policy. And then I had policies for the high school and the elementary school that were dramatically different, just based on applications that were needed and some of the different pieces of that. And then beyond that, there were a couple of edge cases where we had like a third child level of policy, where we went into, for example, at the high school, a bunch of our math teachers needed a very specific software, and our administrators also had a separate policy. But the admin policy, I think we ended up by the end of it, at first we had it broken into high school and elementary school, and then admins were in there, and that just got messy, and we ended up with a third main level policy for specific administration devices so that we could easily manage the three core groups of our devices, which were high school teachers, elementary school teachers, and then administration.
Thanks for that.
All right, let's go ahead and dive into actually seeing some of this in practice in Ninja, if that's okay. I have not checked time, so if we have anybody who we were going to bring on, Jonathan, I don't want to override that.
Yeah, no, this is great. A couple of quick questions before you do this, Jeff. So we do have Julius, and he's saying, "Oh man, super confused." But as David pointed out, like, yeah, thanks for raising your hand and saying that, Julius. And that's obviously we wanted to help with that here, and hopefully things can click after you've had a little bit more time in the tool. But like David says, getting in touch with your account manager, you've got free and limited support. You know, you can reach out not just for like issues or bugs, but just for help getting things started. So I would definitely recommend taking advantage of that. Also hopping in Discord too, like David's suggesting. People like David and Mikey and some others here that I see, everyone's super great and eager to help out with folks. So yeah, you got a couple of resources there to help with things. We do have a and you probably do anyway. We'll take this off this call. I'll help you figure out what your who your account manager is. We also have a question from Joel, and I'm sure this is going to depend, right? But he says, "What do you think, in your opinion, is the right number of machines to create a policy for?"
I would say I don't think the number of machines really matters, in my opinion. I think what really matters is what, again, is going to vary between your devices. If you have 1,000 machines or 2,000 machines, and all those machines, they're all alerting on the same stuff, they're all deploying the same applications, they're all patching on the same day. Yeah, I mean, why reinvent the wheel? There's no need to add complexity in there when there's no need for it. Now, if you have 30 different customers and 150 machines, and everybody's got to patch it a different day, and everybody's needs new different applications, even though it's a smaller number of devices that you're managing, you have probably way more policy complexity to account for in that case. So yeah, I think number of devices just really doesn't matter. What really matters is how much variation you have in your groups of devices. So maybe that's a better way to look at it, is if you were to group your devices together based off of what you're alerting on, what you're patching on, what you're automating on those devices, what integrated AV they're using. I think those 4 pieces of criteria right there, that is what I would start with in terms of deciding what is varying between my groups of devices. If I can group my devices by that, right there, you have your policy groups. That is what you should group your policies by.
Thank you, Jeff. And Julius, great, you're on Discord. Everybody, yeah, we'll post a link to join again. But anyone who's watching, if you want to keep the conversation going, definitely do join the Discord. Before we move on, I'm sorry, Jeff, just to push it back a little bit more, a couple minutes. Ian, I'm just curious from your perspective, again, as a customer, when you were first setting things up, did you find things pretty understandable? Like, where were you going for resources and help to understand how to set up policies?
So I had the advantage, I had a bit of an advantage with my setup at the MSP that I was at when I was doing that was already there, right? So I had a pretty baseline understanding of how the policy structure worked from looking at that. And then when we ended up deploying it at the school and I was building everything out for the school internally, I had that knowledge to go off of. So I had a bit of a cheat code, but then also I had a second cheat code, which is just, I was super active in the Discord already. And so I was in there constantly picking people's brains. And I guess not even so much picking people's brains as much as for a long time I lurked. And rather than asking a question, chances are somebody else had already asked it or would ask the question. Um, but overall, I found things relatively understandable. Without diving into the whole chaos that is people's opinions about policies and what's good and bad about them. We've had some fun conversation about that in the Discord a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure it will continue. Um, I will say that overall, the one policy structure made a lot of sense to me. It was easy to do the parent-child deployment. Moving things when I went to move things around, like when I took the admin policy and decided that I was going to make it a higher level policy, that was a little complicated. Just in terms of, I kind of had to rebuild the whole structure there and remember exactly what the policy was. Um, but overall, I found it, super understandable, relatively easy to just flow through. The dojo is a great resource. And I mean, also, just personally, I learn best from looking at things and playing with things. So I spent a lot of time just in the policy screen and kind of a testing environment and just playing with it to see, all right, how exactly do I want this to work? I was fortunate. I had, I think, 3 teachers at the school that were my lab rats, if you will. They were very understanding and very technical. Um, if you have that resource in internal IT, I would strongly like that's probably the best advice that I could give anybody is to take advantage of your technical end users and try and work with them because they're also, at the end of the day, they're the people that are going to deal with whatever it is that your policy does, right? So if there's something that it's going to create a problem, it's a great opportunity to kind of build that out in advance okay, I'm going to deploy this to these 1 or 2 people so that they can see what it looks like and let me know if there's any pain points.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Ian. All right, Jeff. So you wanted to get down and dirty with the showing things actually in Ninja.
Yeah, just to kind of give an idea of, I think especially how you can maybe lay out policies a little bit more easily. I know that I saw some people say that the PowerPoint looked bad enough, and in Ninja things are a little bit flatter. And so I wanted to take some time to kind of show how you could potentially make your policies a little bit more easy to navigate, to where the inheritance becomes a little bit more obvious, and then also how you can use emojis. Always a popular way. Oh, that is
Awesome.
the
Sounds
wrong
great.
screen. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Hopefully that is the right one. Okay, let me make that a little bit bigger, hopefully. And so right here, I am in our actually European sales environment. And you can see here that we have a nomenclature, a naming convention that we've put in place to make the way that policies inheritance a little bit more obvious. It's very easy. All we're doing is we have the first number here denoting essentially the overall global parent that you're in. And so in this case, it's 0 for the master Windows workstation policy. And then beneath that, we can start to inherit. So 0.1, that would be the first level of inheritance on the first master policy, the 0 policy, Windows Workstation. And then you can continue to inherit below that. So for example, we have some lab machines down here. Actually, that's not right. Let's switch to this tab here, and this will make it a little bit more clear. So right here, we have the first layer, the global configuration policy. Below that, we have our first inherited policy, the operational policy. And then below that, we have some organizational specific or location specific policies that we have inheriting from our first level here. So overall, we have 2 levels of inheritance, a grandparent, a parent, and then child policies beneath that. And so I can go ahead and use the 0.1, 0.3, 0.4 to denote where I have that branching inheritance. And it has the benefit of making the inheritance a little bit easier to see within the list here, because normally we would just do this using alphabetical sorting. And so this just I think gives you a little bit more of a linear idea of how the policies are actually inheriting within Ninja. And we saw over here that you can actually add emojis as well. And so this is a good way to visually denote what policy you're on and help reduce error. Of course, you want to make sure you use the user permissions to ensure that people who should not have the ability to change policies uh, don't have that ability. But just to make it easier, I do find that adding in emojis for the various policies can make it a little bit easier to kind of tell what policy you're on and reduce the possibility of error. So if we go to Emojipedia, you can actually go ahead and add in these emojis into the policy here. If we go into a particular policy, and if I go and click on the policy name in the top left, I will see the option here to do two things, or three things really. One is rename the policy. And so we can go ahead and add in our particular emoji here if we want, or add in the nomenclature at the beginning. So it's a little bit more obvious how everything inherits. We can also add a description here too. And then we can also enable or disable the policy, something we haven't really talked about so far. But if you did want to essentially bypass a policy and take it out of the equation in an inherited chain of policies, you can do that. Just go ahead and unclick the enabled selector, and that means that this policy will no longer be in effect. It doesn't delete it, so you're not losing any of the potential work that you had in place, but it does remove it from the equation if you need to temporarily disable and take this out of the equation. I think with that, we're starting to run up against time. So, Jonathan, were there any like last minute questions that we wanted to address in the chat?
We will give folks another a minute here to see if there are any last call for questions. If there are any, let us know. Jeff can answer those. Otherwise, everybody knows where to find us. But Jeff, thanks so much for taking time. Ian, thank you for running back and jumping on to providing your own personal anecdotes from the trenches, the real world. And yeah, I mean, I think with that, unless there's any other question, I can give a couple of plugs for some things. Jeff, you've got your own events coming up of a personal nature, but you're going to be out of pocket for a little while for good reasons. On the Ninja side, we've got a couple things going on this month that are happening a little bit later. We're going to be doing another live stream. And we did a couple weeks ago. David came on and provided a great walkthrough of how he approaches writing PowerShell scripts. Mikey is going to join us and walk through how he sets up VS Code and sets up a Git. And so kind of the tooling around PowerShell and some of the things that he does there. We're also going to be celebrating World Backup Day for the second year with an episode of our backups and bandwidth event. And so we're going to have Dan Myers, our product manager of backup, being a dungeon master and leading a poor, unsuspecting crew of players through a diabolical backup disaster recovery scenario. And we'll actually be tabletopping that and rolling dice and all that good stuff. So more information to come on that, but that's something that's going to be taking place. Let's see. World Backup Day is the 31st, which is a Sunday. So we'll be doing it on March 29th, which is a Friday. We'll send out invites and all that good stuff. Last thing, Robin, seeing your name made me think about this. Robin was really kind of one of the masterminds behind us doing our March Scripting Madness Challenge for this month. So for anybody who's watching who doesn't know what that is, we announced it in Discord. We have a script share there. There's also a script share in the dojo. Both of those are great places to check, go with resources to check out. We invited folks to post scripts, and you have a couple more days to do this. We're actually extending our deadline for receiving eligible scripts to Thursday. So you have 2 more days to submit a script. It doesn't have to be brand new. It can be something that you've already shared before, but share it in a very specific channel in Discord. If you go to Discord, you'll see where that is. And you will be eligible to win, let's see, I think it's a new OLED Steam Deck. And so we're giving away that prize. We're going to be doing like a bracket system. So wanted to give a little bit of encouragement to enter there. And Mikey's going to be doing some judging for us. Thank you, Mikey, for doing that. So yeah, that's all my plugs. I think that's me giving folks enough time to add in any other questions. I didn't see any. So Jeff, I think you're off the hook.
All right. Well, if anybody does have any questions, you know where to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff, and enjoy your time off.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thank you again, everybody. And thank you, Ian. We will see everyone soon. Have a good one.